you have here the minimum level of kavanah by Netilat Yadayim for Maran is that you, the person having your hands washed, should have the proper kavanah. Whereas for the Raman, no, we want also the person who's washing the hands to be able to have kavanah also. This is really what we're boiling it down to. That's the purpose of this halakha.
What about sort of like an android? Because in the future we're going to have robots doing things.
It's going to be the same. It's going to be the same idea. It's not
even though it's not a sentient being.
Correct. Correct.
I guess we're going to let
All
her
the more
give
so because your intention is on the machine and in the act.
See, now this is
So
where it gets complicated.
that's
Remember
interesting,
by the machine matzah?
Oh yeah.
There were wars about that. Can the machine have enough kavanah to do the mitzvah of matzah? There were real wars. Europe almost burned down over this, right?
But the machine was designed for the matzah.
But it doesn't have logical
So there was
thought.
Right. Okay. So
If I did require matzah to have intelligent thought going into each matzah being baked, in that scenario, a machine wouldn't cut it. The question there was really, if the person who presses the button of the machine has kavanah, is that enough kavanah involved? You have to understand, we were talking machine matzahs in the olden days in Europe. They didn't have buttons in machines. It's not manishevet matzah. It was like they were cranking the matzahs through. They were moving them to the other side of the machine, and they everything was done what we would consider today manually.
Right.
And there was my father, he gave a shiur about this a few years ago in Shavuot. I didn't remember. He brought an extensive list of sources. I still have them in my house. And he did some pretty incredible research on this topic. And there was a Chabad rabbi in Israel, a posek, and he made a matzah factory. And part of his matzah factory had the part that flattens the dough. If I'm not mistaken, was cranked by a hand crank. What do you call that thing? Whatever it is. And the other rabbis went nuts, crazy. Oh, it's not a machine. It's not a handmade matzah. It's a machine matzah. And then Chabad went out against him. And then he said, "Listen, the whole thing. What would the Rebbe have said? Had the Rebbe been here? It was a big conversation. It boiled down to him saying, you know those metal poles they use when you knead the dough? Is that a machine? I mean, if my cranking the dough through a flattener is a machine, then who says that the rolling pin that you use in the matzah factory is not a machine?
Right.
I mean, you're going to reach a place where you can't even use something to mix the water with because that's a machine. I mean,
It's a logical argument. You keep extending it out.
correct.
Before you know
His
it.
whole thing is you are not giving a halachic definition of what is a machine that's forbidden to make matzot. You're simply banning any kind of contraption that helps you in the making of matzah, and that's not a halachic category because it's undefinable. And even though he was right, they boycotted his matzot, and from what I understand, he doesn't make matzot.
A related question, but maybe slightly off the issue, like when a Rebbe was the Lubavitcher Rebbe considered to be a posek in and of himself?
It's a very difficult question to answer, and I don't know that I'm the right one to ask this question to.
I understand, but if a Rebbe gives an opinion or says something, it seems like people hold by it, and it seems like they take a shortcut around halacha. Because I know there's Shulchan Aruch Baal Tanya, right?
Oh, this is a great question.
Because I'm very confused about that. It's like, the Rebbe said we do this, but is that a psak din,
Right.
or is it an opinion based al pi kaval? Where is it coming from? I mean, I'm not just with the Lubavitcher
No, so
Rebbe.
no, but exactly. Let's not
like
talk
that.
specifically about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Clearly had the knowledge is not lacking, but the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Oh,
He's
of course, God forbid.
Rabbi Mordechai Halev said about him, "Kol raz lo an Islam." There's nothing he didn't know, and so that's not a question here. The question is really the other way around. What is the job description of a Hasidic Rebbe? This is somewhere where, instead of going to what is he or what is he not, what does it mean to be a Rebbe? When I first got married, this is one of my earliest conversations with my wife. What is the Rebbe's job? Is he a posek? Well, that's not his primary function. Okay. Does he read the Torah at services? No, it's beneath a Rebbe to be the Torah reader. Okay. Does he lead services? Like on a yard side of family? Okay, fine. So I go through a list of things that normally. Does he do people's weddings? No, it's a big deal to get the Rebbe to come to your wedding. Okay. Is he a mohel? No. The rest of them, no. So what on earth does the Rebbe do? He provides spiritual guidance. Now you have to understand, the Litvish in me that studied in Baltimore laughs in this way. Oh, spiritual guidance. Okay, so everyone, the guy at 7-Eleven can do that too. And what's the spiritual guidance? Big deal. The Hasidim invented a new office. It's a new... They'll tell you it's old. I've had my many debates. The tzaddik is an old term. But let's say that until the founding of the Hasidic movement and a little bit afterwards, the job of a rabbi is primarily lifsok halacha, to determine halachic matters. That's what the rabbi is sitting and talking. Yes, matters of philosophy as well, the commentaries in the Chumash, absolutely. But the primary function is to lead a community, and how do you lead a community? Within the realm of halacha. And so what kind of rabbi could then say, oh, I'm not a posek? You find something interesting that happens, and that somewhere along Hasidic history, I'm not a Hasidic historian, you have to ask them, you find that rebbes start hiring a posek. In most Hasidic courts, not all, there were exceptions to this rule. For example, Rav Chaim of Sanz was an exception to this rule. A number of I believe the Rabbi Munkach also was an exception to this rule. They would be the Rebbe, and there was an Av Bedin, or the head of the Bedin, who would make halachic rulings for the community. The Rebbe doesn't give smicha, the Bedin gives smicha. There are a number of things which kind of creates it's like two different heads. There's the halachic head of the community and the spiritual head of the community. In the Sephardic world, we don't understand how spirituality could exist outside of the realm of halacha. I'm going to be honest. And therefore, the Sephardic rabbi's role is to guide the community spiritually as dictated by halacha. In the Hasidic community, though, there's a lot more, and I'm judging favorably, a lot more that goes. There's Kabbalah that comes in, there's what the previous rebbes did, what Jews in Europe did, reactions to the reform or conservative movements that they were struggling, all kinds of things that go into the Jewish equation.
There's a lot of gray area. That was, for years and years, trying to study and weed through all that. It's like, what is actual Jewish law? What are opinions? What are, as you say, reactions? What are minhagim? And everything seems to be glommed
it's
together.
Kind of mushed together.
Well, if you do this, you have to dress like this, or you're expected to do that, or we don't accept your kashrut unless you do. It's like
There's
it goes
a famous
on.
story, and I'm sure that the
it's all
Satmar
glommed
Chassidim
together.
will disagree with the story. But the famous story told by the Satmar Rebbe. When the Satmar Rebbe wrote his book, Vayoel Moshe, which is his endless diatribe against the state of Israel and Zionism, and how only the Satan could have created the state of Israel. It's a big, thick book with thousands of sources in it, by the way. The Satmar Rebbe, but this is exactly what Chachamim say. Chachamim say in the Talmud, Kan derachim l'teher et hasheretz. There are 150 ways to make an impure animal kosher. And if you are a real Talmid Chacham, you can bring sources to anything you want. If truth and Hashem are not guiding you, then you could use whatever Jewish sources you want to justify anything in the world it is that you do or don't do. And the person who's going to break Shabbat, if they knew halakha well enough, could find a way to allow them to. Everyone's got their own. You want to eat a pig? I'm sure you could find a way. This is something that can be done. So when the Satmar Rebbe wrote his book, he sent it to the Av Bedin. And Satmar, that's how it works. There's a Rebbe and there's a posek. So he sent it to the posek to get a letter of approval on the book. Yeah, that's what normally you do. When you print a book, you get a letter of approval. So he waited a week and he didn't get a letter of approval. He waited 2 weeks and then he got a letter of approval. So he finally bumps the door and said, "No, when's my letter? Rebbe, give me another week." Give him another week. Didn't get a letter. So finally he met the Dayan and said, "Listen, what's going on? How come you're not giving me a letter of approval?" So this is supposedly the conversation. Obviously, I'm sure no Satmar man in the world will back me up on this. But as I've seen written in books about this topic from the other side, the Dayan told the Satmar Rebbe, he said, "Rebbe, if this book is a work of halakha, I cannot write a letter of approval because it does not conform to the rules and regulations of halakha. It doesn't stand the peer review of halakha. If this is a work that is written in Ruach HaKodesh, and because of that it's divinely inspired and therefore must be correct," he said, "I trust that the Rebbe has Ruach HaKodesh and therefore I believe that everything he writes in this book is true, but Ruach HaKodesh is outside of my jurisdiction to write letters of approval for." And that's famously why the Satmar Rebbe's book doesn't have a letter of approval from his own Hasidic community on it. Because it was written, it doesn't conform to the guidelines of how halachic work is written. And there is this idea, listen, our Rebbe, he said something, and that was because Hashem told him, Eliyahu and Navi told him. That might actually be true. It simply doesn't fit into the halachic equation. When I want to argue with a halakha, so I have to judge, is it biblical, rabbinic, is it a custom, like you mentioned? Then I know how much flexibility do we have with this halakha. If fasting on Tisha B'Av is rabbinic, then I have a certain level of flexibility. If it's pushed off and that makes it in a lesser rabbinic category, then I have even more flexibility with it. But if you tell me something is al pi ruach hakodesh, it comes through divine inspiration to human, I don't know how to rule. What category does that fall into? How do you debate this? I can't debate it on Navi, but I can tell you it doesn't fit.
Well, what's the fine line between Ruach HaKodesh and the Ruach?
Oh, very good.
because there are the Rambam talks about, there are actual requirements of a Navi.
So it's none other than the Lubavitcher Rebbe who actually asked this question in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, in the first Mishnah. Lubavitcher Rebbe is a fascinating work, which is today translated into English, so I'm very excited to say that. It's probably been around for a while, but I only recently started in English.
I've read it.
It's called Biurim LePirkei Avot, the commentaries on Pirkei Avot. It's very important. Don't buy something that's paraphrased. Buy it if it's an actual translation from the Lubavitcher Rebbe's writing. It's very important that you read the original. And in there, the Lubavitcher Rebbe has a big question on the Torah transmission from Sinai. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe received from Sinai. He gave to Yoshua. Yoshua to the elders. The elders. It goes through the prophets at a certain point. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe's question is: we know that you're not allowed to study halacha from prophets. Prophets don't teach halacha. I mean, prophecy, halacha that comes through prophecy is not binding on the Jewish people. Only Moshe Rabbeinu got prophecy in Mount Sinai, and that's the Torah that we follow. Everything else must come through the rules of Torah logic. And so the Lubavitcher is, how could it be that the prophets are part of the transmission of the Torah from Sinai when we know that you don't accept halacha from prophecy? And the Lubavitcher rules that they were mentioned as prophets only because that's who they were. That was their profession. They were prophets. But when they transmitted halacha, they did not transmit it as prophets. Rather, they transmitted it as chachamim. I mean, they would teach their yeshiva, in this role, I'm a chacham. I'm not a prophet. Everything I'm sharing with you does not come from the realm of prophecy. The moment a halacha comes from the realm of prophecy, we don't deal with it. In fact, the whole concept of saying Hallel on Rosh Chodesh, that we say that it's a minhag of the prophets, that's precisely why the Rambam rules it's forbidden to say a blessing on it. Because it doesn't have you cannot bless on a custom that doesn't come from the chachamim, the proper channels of chokhmah. So that's a fantastic point, and it's the Lubavitcher Rebbe himself that codified such a concept. And I would just, on the last note, if we're talking about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I think it's very important, and I used to have years in my life where these matters concern me a lot more. Today, I really don't dabble so much in this field, but if somebody were to seriously sit down and study the writings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and I'm far from telling people that they don't understand their own rabbi's writings, that's not fair, it's not correct, but you can very much see the difference between the writings, the teachings, even the halachic approach of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and what is on the street of those who admire him endlessly. And you see that there is dissonance there. It's not, God forbid, I'm not even saying it in a negative way, it's simply different. When I once spoke to a Chabad Chassid, a Torah scholar, he wasn't an ignoramus, and I said, do you ever study? And I mentioned a number of books. He said, I don't have time to study your books. We have so many of our own books from our own Rebbe that until I finish all of those, I'm not even going to bother opening up your books. And I said, that's really interesting that you say that, but your Rebbe was a prime example of somebody who studied all the books he get his hands on. If you look through the Lubavitcher Rebbe's notes in his books, it's just that it's an exciting adventure. If you know names of rabbis, it's unbelievable from where he pulls information. I mean, from people in his generation, contemporaries like Rabbi Yosef, who in the street they say they were big enemies, but you see him quoted. He quotes him as the genius Rabbi Yosef, as he quotes him inside of his book. To quoting rabbis that were not even big fans of the Hasidic movement or the Hasidic communities.
And secular sources as well.
I personally don't see him in his footnotes quoting, but I'm certain that he was a broader person.
When he would talk to scientists, he would talk science,
correct. Yeah, that's true. And so when I approached this Chassid about that, I said, your Rebbe was the one that took from everywhere, and his answer to me was, I'm not the Rebbe. Meaning, I am a Chassid. He's the Rebbe, I'm a Chassid. That's a different thing. Listen, again, my head, I don't know how to wrap around that. I'm simply saying that there are Hasidim or Hasidic Rebbes you could pick on for going around this halachic process, but Lubavitcher Rebbe, interestingly enough, is not one of them. At least the majority of instances that I'm familiar with.